Right, now, first of all, I was just going to show you a few things about the space station. Then there's a couple of books, or maybe a few more than that. And if I have time, depending, I might tell you about one of the authors of one of those books and what happened to him. Although, let's see if we get that far. Right, so the space station. Oops, going back. This is a NASA graphic, and it's telling you what's attached to it at the moment, supposedly. So there's the Crew Dragon at this end. That's the one that's there at the moment. There's a Soyuz and then one of these Progress things, which are the same as Soyuz. They're just the unmanned cargo versions. And all these bits and pieces there. We always see the space station from below, or from an angle, but essentially from below, because it keeps the same face pointing downwards. But as it goes around in orbit, the ends of the central spar here, with the panels on, they rotate. So the angles, it looks quite different a lot. And actually, it's rather like the moon in that every time it comes over, the lighting and the angles are just a bit different, and you get different views every time. So this was it from this week, a few days ago. Not particularly good. The seeing was just not very good. And you can just about see these radiator panels here. Solar panels haven't come out too well. This is an interesting one here. This is an artifact of the stacking, because everything appears to be doubled up. There's almost something there and something there. That's a problem with the way Registax has done it, I think, because it doesn't look like that at all. So there. This is, if I've got this right, yeah, this is better views from late in March. There was a pass where it was high up, a nice favourable one, but also the seeing was really good, which is unusual. So you can see radiator panels showing up nicely, and the shadows. These are shadows being cast across there because the sun is down the bottom here somewhere. But anyway, I was thinking these images, could I do a bit more with them? So, and can you identify anything? So I've taken this off of Space Weather today. This is off of Heavens Above, I should say. And this is a view more or less corresponding to this one, except the solar panels, as I say, they rotate and they're not quite at the same angle, but the rest of it is similar. And you can see we're picking up this bit here, that's okay. The dragon is there and it's not in this graphic, it's missing. And here, again, you can't really see it coming out. There would be the Soyuz and possibly these panels here, and maybe these bits and pieces here. Well, it's these things here that are casting the shadows across to there. So yeah, it's things are beginning to come out, but it all depends on whether it's a good pass. Is it high up in the sky? Which means it'll be close, and is the atmosphere up to it? And you need both of those to get that kind of detail. It's really unusual. I didn't get it at all this week, or the other last week. This is something else. This is what Rod showed earlier. I've taken some frames from a single pass. This is again from March, just a little bit of time apart. So the angle changes slightly, and so you can compare them and get a sort of 3D effect. Now, I sent these out in the email on the chat group earlier, so if you want to check them out, have a look. I can't decide how different to make the angle to get the optimum view, but I'm just playing with it. It's just a bit of fun. But it should give you a 3D effect where you can see effectively that this central bit here is distinct and these are in front and behind it. But anyway, and I'll take it a bit further. These are GIFs where I've just put two frames together and tried to show it 3D like this. And again, here the quality of the two frames isn't equal, and this one here is probably a bit too different. But well, it's something to do with. Whether I can get any better or not at the moment, unless I upgrade the equipment. I don't think I'll be doing that for a while. There we go. And anyway, right, the books. Now, a couple of books have come out lately that I've found really, really good. And this one, which I first came across in a review in Sky and Telescope, came out last year, and the review was very tempting, so I bought it on Kindle. It was only about £5 or £6. I thought, yeah, I'll have that. And it's absolutely superb. The title, what she's talking about here, is the fact that increasingly astronomers work at computers. They don't very often, or so much, go off to the observatories and let alone look at the sky. And they don't fiddle around with photographic plates anymore and all that entails. And there's a feeling that the profession's losing something. And this title reflects that. Now, the author is a mid-career astronomer. She got a contract, a publishing deal for this book. She interviewed several hundred astronomers, and she's an astronomer herself. So there's her own stories as well are in it. And it got some publicity when it came out in the States. And there is, I think, on YouTube, this is the Royal Institute, I think there's a conversation about it, a Q&A, which I think is on YouTube. I've not seen it, but I might have a look at it. And this here is some other, I don't know, some radio event in America. That may well be lurking around somewhere on the web. But well worth, I did hear a brief interview by her. Now, the stories in the book are remarkable. If you want to know what it's like to be an astronomer, really, and there's a wide range of different things they do, well, this is it. This is what you want to read. So some of the stories, what's it like, for example, oh, that's the wrong one. Where'd that come from? Oh, right. Well, that's not what I was looking for. What's it like, for example, if you get precious time on one of these far out observatories? Well, you travel there. You've got to hope the weather's going to hold up for you. It might not. You've got to make sure you can cope with the high altitude. Some people just can't. You have to acclimatise perhaps on the way up. If something crops up while you've got the telescope, you've got time, and it's what they call a target of opportunity. So if there's a comet or a nova or something's come up that's really, really urgent, you'll lose it. The telescope will be used for that instead. Too bad for you. And yet you might have had to wait months or years to get the time. So it can be tough. Now, also, of course, in the middle of the night when you're doing this sort of work, you might well be sleep deprived because you've had to travel and your routine's all over the place. You might not be very good with the low oxygen. So it's not a good state to be in if you've got to make any decisions. So this author, she did have an issue. They didn't know what to do with a piece of equipment one night, and she didn't know what to do. And she just took the assistant. There are these full-time assistants who stay in the observatories and guide you. Well, they said, oh, let's just turn it on and off again, which they did. There we are. Now, one story I did like was there was an astronomer who died at an observatory. He was killed about 40 years ago. And what had happened was the dome, the top bit here, the dome bit rotates. Well, when it rotates, there's an alarm bell rings, so that you're not going to walk out of the hatchway or bang your head or anything. And when the bell stopped, the astronomer there thought or assumed that meant the dome would stop rotating. But it has a certain inertia. It carries on for a few seconds until the friction stops it. But he forgot that, and he walked out of a door as the thing was still moving, but after the alarm had stopped, and he was killed immediately. And say it was 40 years ago. Now there are all sorts of astronomy prizes in his name and memorial lectures and things. So, but I'd never heard of that story. Then there's another one, just one more. There's a telescope in, I think it's Texas, I suppose it would be, where there's somebody attacked a big telescope with a gun and shot it. And the story is it was a disgruntled, mentally disturbed guy who burst his way into the observatory, demanded that he access to the telescope, and he had a gun, and he shot at the mirror. Now, if you think the mirror is going to be damaged, well, the mirror was several tons, and the bullet is not so much. And in fact, there were just a few little dents. And when they were polished up, they think the telescope lost a couple of percent, 5, 6, 7, 5, something like that, a few percent of its efficiency. And it's quite famous within astronomy. The telescope is a victim of gun crime, but it's quite true. And there are other stories, I suppose, about particularly in the observatories that are in the deserts and things, about various creatures that find their way in, so tarantulas and things like that. So, but there's all sorts there. It's a wonderful book, and I can't praise it enough. I wonder if it was a career I might have had at one point, but well, you know, but it tells you what it would have been like. So go for that. It's not expensive. Probably now it's coming up on the second-hand market, I would think. But really, really worth a read. Right, well, the next one, which has gone out of order a bit here, is this book here, The Mission, by David Brown. Now, despite the rather awful cover here, this is a story in the background of the forthcoming Europa Clipper interplanetary mission, which is going to, at the moment, that's going to be launched by the Space Launch System, the big new American NASA rocket, should it ever take off. And the big rocket like that means that the trip to Jupiter can be minimized and in time. But of course, how did these things come about? And this story is really the characters involved and how the mission evolved. And you have to appreciate that NASA's judging lots of competitive missions against each other, which one wins the competition, and you get a sense of what the competition is like and how things can suddenly, you think you've got the mission and then suddenly it's cut and so on. So it's a very interesting story. I had it as an audio book. Occasionally I lost track of who was whom. Really, I thought it was great. And one story I did like was the guy working for NASA. It was in the early 70s. And he was being drafted, so he expected to go to Vietnam. He was going to go into the Air Force, and he fully expected to go off to Vietnam. But anyway, the drafting means you are sent where the government thinks you're of most use. And it turned out, because he was a photo interpreter, aerial photos and things, that actually NASA needed people like that desperately. And so his national service, his draft, he was working for NASA. Well, that's a big relief rather than going to Vietnam, which I thought was a really interesting little story. Oh, that's from before, so let's just go back. But anyway, it's a really good thing. The Europa Clipper's going ahead now, but it's the process that goes on. If you've read any of Alan Stern's work about the background to New Horizons, some of it may be familiar. And in fact, Alan Stern crops up in the story a few times. It's well worth it. I say I also enjoyed this book, but it's a different sort of book from the one before. So this is just observatories, what it's like when you go to these places, as in the first book, remote, high altitude. Although nowadays increasingly you're doing it by distance. You're logging in from remotely, which is the change to things. Oh yes, one other book. This one I've got here, and I'm not going to show you. I've got this is just a star atlas, but all the interesting things you can photograph are highlighted very clearly and indexed. And I find it very handy. So if there's a constellation which I can actually see from my garden, it's not blocked up by trees or anything, I have a look in this atlas. Is there anything in there worth photographing? And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. But I find it much more useful for that than, say, my other atlases, and certainly something like Norton's is no use at all. So, and I bought this about 20 quid, I think. It's a paperback. So anyway, I can't show it to you without turning the thing off, so I won't do that. And finally, I thought I'd mention these. If you haven't got these, well, you should think about getting them. They're published about 40 years ago, and it's quite unique. These handbook, well, it goes through the constellations one by one, and then, of course, you need 3 volumes for that, and it's quite unique. There's nothing like it. Nothing like it has been published since. And to give you some idea, it's printed out in this sort of home typewriter style, and for every constellation there's notes about all the stars, all of them, features if they're interesting in any way, that's all there, a bit about the folklore, and it's really thorough. So if you have a constellation that you're looking at and you want to know a bit more, or you're just curious, well, this is something to get. Now, it's out of print, although I think you can get it on a Kindle, but it seems not really the sort of thing you'd want on a display, on a screen. I bought mine secondhand, came over from America actually. I think that's really the way you can get hold of them. But really, I mean, it is unique and well worth getting hold of. But actually, I thought, so I've got some time. Yes, I'll explain to you that this guy, Burnham, let's go back. Robert Burnham here. Back in the 90s, there were 2 Robert Burnhams in astronomy. One was the editor of the American Astronomy magazine, and many people would think that, oh yes, Robert Burnham must be him. But actually, no, this was a different Robert Burnham who worked at the Lowell Observatory in Arizona for a long time. And he's rather a different figure. And to cut the story, well, let's just forward. This is him. He worked at the Lowell Observatory for over 20 years. He was very good at public speaking as a communicator. He was meticulous. His books are a testament to that. But what happened to him was that in the 70s, the funding for what he was doing, or his job, was drying up, and it was going to stop. Now, I've been in the academic universities, and I know what this feels like. You know it's coming. Well, it was the same for him. But as the faithful end of funding date approached, the observatory didn't have any other role for him, although they did offer him the position of janitor, which he turned down. But this is the strange thing. He didn't apply for anything anywhere. The fame of his book meant he could have got a job in a planetarium or across the country. He would have been able to, really, would have been a good hire, but he just didn't. And he quit. He didn't move. I think he still lived around, and he just went into a mental decline. And he died in 1993, 61. He was in his early 60s. Well, as you can see, 62. And no one knew. And it turned out that he died in absolute poverty. Clearly, what we would now say mental health issues. Nobody knew. When they found out, the Lowell Observatory put this memorial on the right here up, commemorating his book. But that was the most people knew. They didn't know anything about it. And it turned out, I mean, look back, he was estranged from his family. He just wouldn't communicate. So they didn't know he had died for a couple of years. He'd fallen out with the publisher. Dover, the people who published his book, well, the reason there aren't many editions and it's not updates and things, well, he just argued with them. He wouldn't have translations. In books, you've got all sorts of issues come up, and he just wouldn't cooperate on any of them. So the issue, the book I've got, the copies I have, are from the 1978 reprint, which has still got its copyright on it. So that's relatively late on, but after that, nothing ever happened, and that's why it's never been, there's not been another version or an update on it. And he just went into this very deep decline, wouldn't apply for anything. It turned out that he used to go to the local astronomy society in these quiet years, but never told anybody who he was. They didn't find out till after he died. And it's a really sad story, and it is entirely down to mental health. He could not recover from losing his job at the Lowell Observatory, even though he was astronomically he was highly employable, and that's what became of him. So there you are. The book's an excellent memorial, and it's rather sad reading through it, reading what became of him. But there you are. But I say, if you ever come across these in a second-hand sale or you see them online, I would say just grab them. There's not going to be anything. There still isn't anything quite like it, and some of it's dated very slightly, but for 99% of it, it's absolutely fine. Some of the distances quoted to light years are slightly wrong now, but really, I think it's very forgivable. So that's it. I don't think I have any more for you. Where are we? So there you are. Get out and read or listen to these books, I would say, but especially The Last Stargazers. It's superb. It really is.
Thank you very much, John. That was great.
Thank you. Very good.
You could do it just writing a quick list. Steve has got a copy. You're muted, Steve.
I'll put one on the chat. I'll put one on the. I'll put a list on the chat group tomorrow.
Just put a list on the email. That'd be really good.
Yeah.
Yes, mine's the 1978 edition.
Why has it got M51 on it? And that was what was on the mobile phone on your last picture, John.
Well, I would suppose that was.
His picture.
I would think that was. Let's see.
There is a different cover for each of the 3 volumes.
Yeah.
M51 is just one of them.
Yeah, that's the cover that I've got on my version. My version's the same, like that. But I've got 2 paperback volumes, and one's hardback. In fact, the hardback one's absolutely mid condition. Seems to be an X. I don't know.
Well, my copy says inside the cover, property of Bradford Astronomical Society.
Well, there you go. There you go.
So if they ever find out, I'm in trouble.
We'll make sure they do. Yeah. Okay.